Welcome to Ballyhoo Creations. In this video I'll show you how to make Mr. and Mrs. Franky dolls using the Ballyhoo Creations in the hoop doll designs. I've hooped some no-show mesh stabilizer and I'm stitching the placement stitch. This is color 1 in the face files. And then I lay my fabric on top and go ahead and stitch the face. I'm just floating the fabric here. Here's the Mr. Franky face stitched out and the Mrs. Franky face. Once the faces are stitched out, I trim away the little jump threads away from the face. And then I like to add tiny bits of stuffing into the nose. Sometimes I'll do the cheeks. You could do a little bit of chin, a little bit of brow line. You could soft sculpt these with a little bit of stuffing between the stabilizer and the fabric. I think he needs a little chin. Just tuck that under there. I like to secure the stuffing with a little bit of glue stick. Now let's talk about how to do the hair in the hoop. So this is just a few inches of this faux fur, and I'm going to place it over his face. And I do want to make sure that his scar still shows. And then this is going to be the back piece of hair. I want to make it so that where the fur is pointing down towards his chin, I'm placing that over, and then finally I want the back of his neck to be the skin color, the green. And making sure that my back piece of fur is covering that seam line that you can see on the stabilizer. That's why I'm lifting that up. And then I'm folding this over to give me a finished edge and placing it on top, so that's going to be the bottom of his head. It may not make sense how this sandwich works right now, but once it's turned inside out, it'll all make sense of why they're in that order. And then I cover it with another piece of the mesh stabilizer so my machine won't get caught in those layers, and I just folded it over since I had excess. Now that when I put it on the machine and it stitches that seam all the way around the head, I'll be able to turn it inside out from that fold that I made in the back of the head. There is no side opening on these doll heads on the Mr. or Mrs. Franky, so you do need to do some kind of folding method so that you'll have a pocket to turn them inside out. And if for some reason you don't, and believe me, I have made that mistake before myself, you can always just cut a slit in the back of the head and open and turn them and stuff them that way too. And when you're stitching the head seam, the machine will go around clockwise first, and then it will return counterclockwise so that it's double stitched for a strong seam. Now let's talk about how to open up this head, because we've done the folding method in the back. So I can see where the fold is at the top. You see that green piece where it meets with the black hair. I'm just going to cut a slit in the stabilizer only, making sure not to cut the fabric. I cut a slit in the stabilizer. And then when I reach in there, under the green piece, I can turn that inside out. And now we've got the hair in the front, we've got the hair in the back, and then we've got on the bottom of the back of his head is the skin color. In this case it's green. The reason I don't have the hair go all the way to the bottom of the face in the back is because then it looks like there's hair coming out the back of the neck and it looks really weird. So I always like to have the hair stop and have the skin color in the back of the head down to the chin. Now we stuff the head. Using that flap in the back should give you plenty of access to get the stuffing in both the top and down into the chin. His head is stuffed, not too firmly, just kind of lightly stuffed there. Put a little bit more in, just trying to get his face shaped the way that I want it. So I've got his head stuffed. I'm happy with how his shaping has turned out, and I'm going to glue the hair down in the back to close that opening. Trying to get all that fur out of the way, and then just put a little bead of glue all along the back. I hold it in place for a few seconds. This Fabrifix sets up pretty quick. If you're using another type of fabric glue, it might not grab as quickly. You may have to hold it a little bit longer. The hair in the front is flapping around, so I'm going to glue that down to his forehead as well. And another advantage of doing that is I can make sure that it doesn't cover up that scar on his head. So now we're finished with the Mr. Franky head. If there's little bits of hair coming out of like the neck area, you can always just trim those away and clean those. Let's take a look at Mrs. Franky's head. For her hair, I put the front fur almost down to her bottom of her nose. So now I'm going to cut a slit up the middle, just cutting the backing of the fur, not the actual fur, and then cutting the little triangles away to expose her facial features, especially her eyes and her eyebrows. So I'm just kind of shaping that hair. And that's a trick that you can use. Cover more of the face with the hair and then use your scissors to cut the backing of the fur to do the hairstyle that you want. I'm parting her hair on the side. That's where I want her stripe to go. So I'm getting the black hair parted so that I can glue that little piece of white in the middle there. Just put a little bead of glue. You don't need very much. I'm going to cut off that strip at the top of her head. I don't want it too long. And once that glue dries, I can fluff all the hair together. And with this particular fur, I realized that the white fur that I had was actually longer in length than the black was. So I just took a little pair of scissors and trimmed it down. And that's really, I think, what helped it blend in. Miss Franky's face and hair is finished, so I will stuff her and then glue the flap closed in the back of her, just like I did on the Mr. Franky before. With both of the heads finished, I'm going to hoop up some no-show mesh stabilizer again for the bodies. I had put that on my embroidery machine and stitched the first color, which does the outline on the stabilizer, and this shows you where to place your fabric. I'm going to use some striped fabric for the Mrs. Franky body. Just make sure that the placement lines are covered. And again, I'm going to float it and not tape it or pin it because this fabric doesn't tend to move and we're not doing any intensive embroidery. And then I'm going to place the back fabric right side down, so the right sides will be facing each other here. Place that on top, make sure all the placement stitches are covered, and because I'm doing stripes here, I'm matching up my stripes, so it takes a little bit to get those matched on both sides. And that way the seams will be smoother and the stripes will match up. Sorry I didn't capture it on video, but I put that on my machine and stitched color 2, which does the side seams of the doll body. You can see how the placement line is the outside line that we're going to use as our cutting guide. So I'm going to cut out the doll body using the placement stitches as my cutting guide. I'm going to cut just to the inside of those stitches, not cutting the seam that's on the inside, but cutting the placement lines away from the outside. Make sure we get up into the armpits so that the arms can move freely, and then you'll also want to clip the corners. You want to make sure that you don't leave too much excess fabric along those seam allowances, especially in the hand area, because that way it'll turn inside out much easier if you have that small seam allowance. Because we have the stabilizer and we're using a stretch knit, you don't have to worry about the fabric unraveling and seams coming open. Just be careful when you're doing clips that you don't get too close to those stitches in the seams. In the instructions for the 8-inch doll body, it tells you to leave a fold of fabric vertically along the doll's back so that you can turn and stuff. But I didn't do that in this case on either one of these bodies, so I'm just going to cut a regular slit, cut the stabilizer first, and then I'm going to separate the front and back fabric and get my little tiny scissors in there and just cut a slit in the back. It's kind of like those pajamas where you have a little bit of slit in the back there. You could also do a vertical cut instead of a horizontal cut. Either way is fine. Now I'm turning the arms inside out. I put the hemostats all the way up to the tip. Use my fingernail to poke the fabric into the jaws of the hemostats, and then grabbing at the tip of the hand, I pull gently until the arm is inside out. If it doesn't turn easily, there's probably too much fabric in there. Either your fabric is too thick, or maybe you've got too much stabilizer or too much seam allowance that you need to cut away again. Same thing with the neck. And then once the neck is done, the rest of the feet and the body turn pretty easily. So we'll go ahead and get him turned inside out. We're ready to stuff the body. I'm going to put a pipe cleaner into the arms. You could use a pipe cleaner, a chenille stem, floral wire, anything like that, or you could do the full wire armature that's in the instructions. Now we're just going to stuff the body. Typically I don't stuff the arms. You can if you'd like to, but with the pipe cleaner in there I don't need to. I'm going to stuff the body, put a little bit of stuffing in the legs. These are lightly stuffed. You can stuff them as lightly or as firmly as you like, but you do need to get the neck firmly stuffed because we're going to be attaching the head to that neck, so the neck needs to not flop around too much. So make sure you get it very firmly up in that neck area. After the doll's been stuffed, on this one I'm going to hand stitch that opening closed. I'm just using a ladder stitch here. You could use a whip stitch if you'd like. I had planned on putting clothes over these dolls, so I wasn't too worried about the seam showing. If you are worried about the seam showing, because you're going to leave the bodysuit look on them, then you'll want to do the flap method that's described in the instructions, and it's also in the video for the 8-inch dolls on how to do that flap and the turn. With the body closed up with the stitching and the head has been closed up with the glue, and now I'm ready to attach the head to the neck. I'm going to use a heavy upholstery or a button thread for this, and then just stitch all the way around in about a square area. Attaching the back of the head to the front of the neck, and I'm just running my needle and thread all the way through the neck there. I'd like to mention, I think it's important that you use a heavy thread when you're attaching doll parts together or closing up others in the hoop projects. Regular sewing thread is just not as strong when you pull on it. However, if you're using something very thick like an upholstery thread or a button thread, I think sometimes it's called button and craft, you can get them at any of the places that sell thread. They're much stronger and thicker for hand sewing things like this. I've got the head attached to the neck pretty firmly now. I'm going to finish this up. I'm going to tie it off in a knot, and I'll show you how I do that. I make a little loop, make the needle go from left to right through the loop, and then back through that loop on the left side, the other direction. And sometimes you have to hold those threads up as you pull and tighten, and that will give you a nice firm knot right at the surface of the fabric. And then I'm going to bury the thread inside the doll by poking it down in there, bring the needle out, and then clip it close to the surface. I would also suggest using a long needle that's made for dolls. They're called doll needles actually, or any kind of maybe an upholstery needle or whatever works best for you, but a regular sewing needle is just not long enough to do this type of work. So that's what she thinks about that. Here's the Mr. Franky face all finished, and the Mrs. Franky, and the pair of them wearing some clothes that are in the hoop designs also from Ballyhoo Creations. If you like this video, leave a like YouTube style and subscribe for more in the hoop dolls and designs from Ballyhoo Creations.